Game of Thrones has been a hit with critics and viewers more or less since it started, but it is also a show rife with ethical conundrums. We decided to focus on problems involving characters that are usually seen as the moral good guys of the show, or at least as good as you can get in Game of Thrones. Ned Stark, Daenerys Targaryen, Jon Snow, and Sansa Stark. We then explored how they used, or could have used, the 5 W's and H list better in their choices. Let's get things started with Ned Stark. And if it wasn't obvious already, huge spoiler warning for seasons 1 through 6. Alright, here we go. Good old Ned Stark, that do-goody bastard. I love him as a character, but his honor made him do some dumb things before he met his demise. Whether it be giving Cersei Lannister a warning that he was going to tell King Robert Baratheon about her incest with Jaime Lannister, or trusting Littlefinger, Ned has his fair share of questionable choices. For this, we're going to focus on what was probably his biggest mistake, not siding with Renly Baratheon, Robert's brother, to overthrow Cersei when he had the chance. We'll look at that mistake and explore how Ned could have better focused on the third question of the 5 W's and H list, who wins and who loses, to make a better decision. First, let's look at the setup of the situation. Over the course of the first book and the first season of the show, Ned had investigated and eventually found out that Robert and Cersei's royal children were actually products of incest between Jaime and Cersei. His plan to reveal the parentage of King Robert went off the rails when Cersei orchestrated a boar hunting accident for Robert. As Robert lay dying, Renly offered Ned some of his men to help capture the royal children and overthrow Cersei. This is where Ned messes up. His rigid, honor-bound moral code would not let him do such a thing. His plan was to put Stannis Baratheon, Robert's other brother, on the throne because he is the next oldest legitimate heir. There was no option in his mind. The rules say that Stannis is now king. Never mind that there's no realistic way that he'll have time to place him on the throne before Cersei can get to him. He doesn't care. He ends up losing his head for it. So, let's look at where he could have done differently and had he looked at the possible winners and losers of the situation. Sure, if he had sided with Renly, he would have been damaging his own sense of honor, but there honestly weren't that many other losers in Renly's plan. Had Robert known about the incest before he died, he wouldn't have given two shits about Ned overthrowing Cersei. Hell, he probably would have helped him. Even if Ned had somehow managed to get Stannis on the throne, there is very little to suggest that he would have done well. Renly was a decent man, loved by the people before he died. All of this is speculation, because none of this happened in the story, and this is, well, fiction, but had Ned sided with Renly and helped place him on the throne, thousands of lives likely would have been saved, creating far more winners. The War of the Five Kings would have likely largely been avoided. Renly would have had the forces and support to prevent Tywin Lannister from doing anything rash, and Ned could have just gone back home to the north, away from the political games of the south that he had no idea how to play. The lives of the Stark family would have been saved, as well as thousands of common folk that died in the years of war that came when Ned didn't side with Renly. Granted, that wouldn't have made for half as interesting of a story. Next, let's look at the Mother of Dragons, Daenerys, and how she used the 5 W's and H lists to make decisions over the course of her story.
In Season 3 of Game of Thrones, Daenerys Targaryen is in need of an army to cross the narrow sea with her and fight so she can claim the Iron Throne. She sets her sights on the Unsullied, highly trained warriors that can be found in the city of Ostapor, and sets off to take them. Upon her arrival, she learns that the Unsullied are not just warriors, but in fact are enslaved by men called the Masters. Daenerys is able to outcon the Masters and free the Unsullied, who then in turn pledge to fight for her. She now has the support she needs to storm King's Landing, but her trip to Ostapor opens her eyes to other things: the brutal treatment of slaves in the cities of Ostapor, Yunkai, and Meereen that make up Slaver's Bay. What's your problem? With an army and 3 dragons at her disposal, Daenerys is ready to chase after the thing she wants most, the Iron Throne. But she is also the only person with the power to free the slaves of Slaver's Bay. Why not follow the rules? Basic ethics tells us that the right thing to do would be to prevent and remove the evil of the Masters and use Daenerys' newfound power to free the slaves. But this comes at a great personal cost. Dany has been through a lot of pain and suffering, and she is chasing a throne that is rightfully hers. To risk her brand new army and the ticket to her success is a great personal sacrifice. What's it worth? For the slaves to be freed would mean everything. Daenerys would be giving them their lives back. In return, she would be risking her own life. By creating enemies in such powerful men, she only increases the size of the already large target on her back. She would be slowing her progress towards the throne and would ultimately have to take a number of lives as well. Who wins, who loses? Should Daenerys choose to free the slaves would be the obvious winners. The Masters would lose, and the slave owners around the 3 cities would lose their servants. Daenerys herself would potentially lose some of her army in battles, resulting in potential setbacks on her journey to claim the throne. Who's whispering in your ear? At this stage in the show, Daenerys is counseled by Jorah Mormont and Barristan Selmy. While Selmy is supportive of her quest and believes it's the right thing to do, Mormont believes that this quest is not only a distraction from Dany's true goals, but is risky and dangerous. Outside of her council, there is also the wise master, Razdal Mo Araz, who runs the remaining 2 cities. He tells Dany that many armies have tried to conquer Slaver's Bay and none have succeeded, which only increases the worry of Mormont. How is your decision going to look? If Dany frees the slaves of Slaver's Bay, she will be looked upon as a moral hero. Should she claim the throne, she will be beloved by her people and be seen as someone capable of delivering justice. If she is able to conquer 3 cities, she will also be seen as a powerful military leader. If she chooses to simply move forward on her journey, there really isn't much to lose. No one has asked her to free the slaves, and it is not her responsibility. To other powerful political leaders, the decision may come across as senseless or weak. In the end, Daenerys does liberate Slaver's Bay. Ethically speaking, she is an act utilitarian and focuses on taking the path that promotes the most happiness. By freeing the slaves, she is taking the course of action that will ultimately benefit the greatest number and harm the fewest number. She seeks equal treatment for the citizens in response to the egoism of the masters, and her thinking falls in line with that of Jeremy Bentham, who believes happiness is the key and everyone's happiness has equal value.
Now that we've already looked at one of the dumb Stark men, Ned, let's look at the questionable decision of his bastard son, Jon Snow. Jon is usually seen as one of the moral compasses of the story. It's because of his often naively pure intentions that he often runs into problems of his own making. In this instance, we're going to look at the 4th question in the W's and H's model, what it's worth. Or more simply, what does Jon Snow value, and how did it affect his decision making during the Battle of the Bastards? For the most part, Jon's moral code and actions mirrors those of the man he believes to be his father, Ned Stark. He values honor and generally tries to do the right thing when it comes to helping people. The one area where they both sacrifice their own honor through, though, is when it comes to family. Before Ned was executed by Joffrey, he had made the decision to acknowledge Joffrey as king. He lied, not because he wanted primarily to save himself, but because he wanted to save his family. He thought that by acknowledging Joffrey as king, he would get to take back the Knights of Watch and get to live on. Robb Stark probably would not have started a war, and most of the Starks would probably still be alive. It just so happens that Joffrey was a prick and killed him anyway. But in the end, Ned did choose his family ahead of his own sense of honor. Fast forward to several seasons later, and Jon is in a similar situation. Before the Battle of the Bastards at Winterfell, it's revealed to Jon and his sister Sansa Stark that Ramsay Bolton has their brother Rickon. As soon as they receive message, Sansa is realistic and tells Jon that Rickon was as good as dead as soon as Ramsay got his hands on him. Rickon was believed to be the only remaining male Stark heir at the time. Therefore, was a challenge to Ramsay's claim of Lord of Winterfell. Sansa warns that Ramsay was likely to use Rickon as a trap for Jon. Sure enough, as the soldiers on both sides line up for battle, Ramsay lets Rickon go and tells him that he has to run across the empty battlefield to his brother. Jon charges across the battlefield on his horse to save Rickon, exactly as Ramsay had wanted him to do. As Rickon runs to Jon, Ramsay shoots arrows at him, missing a few times to give Jon and the audience a little hope. In the end, Ramsay connects a shot, killing Rickon as soon as Jon reaches him. Jon doesn't save Rickon, and the damage is done. Ramsay has successfully stranded Jon in no man's land on the battlefield by using his devotion to family to lure him out. Jon is enraged by the death and charges Ramsay by himself, forcing his army to follow him even though he knew they didn't have the numbers. It all comes together at the end when Sansa brings the Knights of the Vale to the party and turns the tide, but thousands of lives probably could have been saved had Jon done a better job prioritizing his values. So let's look at how he could have done just that. Yes, Rickon was Jon's brother to his sense of honor and value of family, should have driven him to at least want to save him. But common sense should have made him realize that he should have valued Sansa and Wilding army more. Sansa was right when he said Rickon was as good as dead, so she was the only family member that Jon realistically had left. And aside from the fact that he needed soldiers, Jon should have valued the Wilding army more because, in a sense, they were like his new family. They didn't follow him into battle because he was some lord they had sworn allegiance to, or because they were sellswords that Jon had paid off. They followed him because they admired him and loved him for what he stood for. Jon's reaction to Rickon's death is somewhat understandable, but is also directly caused the deaths of hundreds of members of his new family of sorts. They deserved a better fate than what they got. Next, we're going to look at another member of the Stark household, Sansa, and how her actions also played a part in some of the deaths in the battle.
Sansa Stark is the eldest Stark child remaining and an unlikely heroine that has managed to survive the trials that have been thrown at her as the seasons have gone on. Throughout the show, Sansa's character has consistently developed. As Sansa has changed, so has her values, outlooks, and decision-making processes. In the beginning, Sansa was quite ambitious and self-serving, doing what she could to achieve her goals. She traveled to the capital with her father to pursue her engagement to Joffrey, but after her father was executed, Sansa was held as a hostage for leverage against her family. After being mentally and physically abused by the Lannisters, accused of murder, forced into hiding with the creep who had a thing for her mom, and escaping the psychotic, sadistic rapist that is Ramsay Bolton, Sansa was determined to take back her home. Over time, Sansa has become more cynical and pragmatic, slowly learning from people around her. Sansa closes herself off, trusts no one, and tends to wait for the tide to turn as a means for survival. When the Battle of the Bastards arrives, Sansa fails to tell Jon some vital information that could have possibly saved the lives of many people. The question of the justification model that Sansa needed to consider is the last step. How is my decision going to look? When Jon and Sansa are preparing for the battle, Jon is determined to proceed despite knowing that they don't have enough men to win. Even though they tried to rally as many troops as they could, Sansa knew that they needed more men. Sansa had previously received an offer of help from Littlefinger, which she refused after realizing that Littlefinger knew that Ramsay was a monster when he had sent Sansa to marry him. However, after Sansa sees that Jon is going to rush into battle and get slaughtered, she sends a letter to Littlefinger requesting assistance without telling Jon. The day before the battle, Jon and Sansa have an argument, and Sansa has the opportunity to tell Jon that she might have a large number of backup coming in, but says nothing. Sansa did not consider the accountability or transparency that goes along with making her decision. Sansa never gave an explanation or a reasoning for her actions. When she decided not to tell Jon about her decision, it took away any chance of her being held accountable if it had fallen through. If she had simply told Jon that she might have troops on the way, then Jon may have waited and the battle could have gone a completely different way. Although the Knights of the Vale did ride in and win the battle, had Sansa warned Jon, then many lives could have been spared. After the battle, Jon and Sansa reaffirmed that they need to have trust in each other and work together. Although Sansa Stark is not very trusting and keeps her plans close to her chest, her loyalty to her family and cunning nature will hopefully continue to work in her favor.
So, even the heroes of the show have some room to improve. Although with a show like Game of Thrones, that's not a huge surprise. Ned, Dany, Jon, and Sansa all make admirable efforts with tough decisions over the course of the show, but they all could have done better by using the 5 W's and H list to make better decisions. If there's one thing to take away from today, though, it's that if you're put into a medieval fantasy world, don't tell a crazy monarch that you're going to have her arrested. It won't go well for you.